Greetings to you both. I think we're all dialed in, we're all connected. It's always exciting when things actually work out the way they're supposed to work. And welcome to you, our audience. We're so glad that you can be here with us. This is the Scholar Evangelist series, and the Scholar Evangelist was it's the person who feels like, I know so much about Jesus, I know so much about the gospel and the Bible, so why is sharing my faith so difficult? So that's why we're here, why we're talking. And so I'm Stephen Cooper. I am the lead pastor of Harbor City Church in San Diego, California. And I'm in my second year doing an evangelism residency with Al Dayhoff and Evangelize Today Ministries. And I'm here today with Dr. Al Dayhoff. Al is the director of Evangelize Today Ministries, and he's also the pastor of Blue Church. It's a church that meets in a blues bar just outside of Washington, D.C. Al, we are glad that you are with us today.
Good to be here, Stephen, and just a delight. As I was saying earlier, just being with you and Michael makes my day.
Then we've also got Michael Davis, Pastor Michael Davis. Michael is the outreach pastor of Christ Church in Trussville, Alabama. Michael's in his first year as an evangelism resident with Evangelize Today Ministries, and Michael runs a YouTube channel. He's got a YouTube channel already called StoryHunters Trussville. We can't wait to hear from you today, Michael. We're excited. Glad to have you on.
Well, yeah, it's fun to be together, and thanks for organizing this, Stephen. And like I said earlier, it's always helpful to have someone with your gifting around to make stuff happen.
That's what we're going to do today. We're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen. And speaking of making it happen, we want to give a special thank you to a sponsor, M&A, Mission to North America. M&A is a ministry that is allowing us to use their Zoom platform right now. So we thank them for that. Mission to North America is engaged in church planting and renewal as it strengthens the church to serve, grow, and multiply. And so they've been a partner with us in the past. They're a partner with us now and going forward. So we're really grateful to them. And then one other final quick shout out, a special welcome to Father Michael Diaruda and his friends from the Anglican Union. So they're joining us today, and we're excited to have them here. So during our time today, we're going to be talking about all kinds of things. And as you have questions that come up, there's two ways that you can give us questions. We're going to have a Q&A time at the end of our session. We'll have about 15 minutes devoted to Q&A. And so use the chat for questions and answers. I'll be monitoring the chat as the questions come in during our time, and we'll turn to that chat section for your questions. And then also we have on Facebook Live, we're also broadcasting this on the Evangelize Today Ministries website, and would invite you to be able to put questions in there. And so, so make use of those two ways to give us your questions, and we will hit those questions later on in our time. And so, we're going to jump right into it. Al, I want to come to you first. Talk to us, Al. Why are you excited today about this conversation?
So, one is, Stephen, that we're interviewing a unique man. So the way I view Pastor Michael Davis is he's a soft-spoken, sort of shy man, but something happened where his anointing got revealed. I think it's something like this. There's a biorhythm in Pastor Michael Davis, where he listens before he speaks naturally. And then building upon that is his powers of observations. And to put it simply, tattoos have come to him because they pick up on, I think there's an anointing with him. And we can unpack that some other time as well. But Michael symbolizes the four values of the Evangelize Today ministry. The first one is, the first value that we work in is shifting from listening to reply to listening to hear. 85% of the population is not coming back into the religious structure. And now with this pandemic, that has increased even more. Stephen, I'm thinking in these terms. It is not, has the Western Church reduced, will the Western Church reduce by a third in attendance, but has it already? And how do we reinvent? And so shifting from listening to reply to listening to hear. And by the way, tattoos so symbolize that. I suspect the image of God has gotten so desperate to talk, it's writing on its wrapper in permanent ink. And for 56 years, I completely missed it. The second value of ET is we have re-entered the age of the parish. In other words, the trajectory has changed. It is not, people are not coming in the building. They're coming from other churches to other churches. And so the minister has been built that his destination in life is that building and that pulpit and that podium. And now the world's not coming in that space. And so we have now re-entered the age of the parish, and that means the minister going in the wild and that being his destination during the week. The third value we work in is a research, introspection, discovery construct of how to share the gospel. You know, Stephen and Michael, I was taught a truthing, telling, presenting way of sharing faith. And when that didn't work, what I did is I would just say it louder or longer. And I think we're in a world now where people want us to listen to them and we get rewarded. One of the things Pastor Michael is going to reveal is how he's been rewarded by listening to what the image of God is writing on the skin. And the fourth value is evangelism is love. And the question is can I get over all of my stuff and get to the point in my life where I can walk through the world and love people just where they are? And in our rush to make converts, what I learned in my own life is I wasn't even making connection. I was just telling, but I didn't have a space to hear what people were saying. So those are the four values, Stephen, of the Evangelize Today ministry.
Yeah, I love it. I think Michael is, and what we're going to talk about is going to embody so much of what you just shared. And so, Michael, before we get into the glory of some of the discoveries that you've made, could you just tell us a little about the journey of what your, like the pathway that you've been on in terms of sharing your faith and evangelism, what it's been like before ET and what it's like now?
Yeah, sure, Stephen. You know, I've always had this desire to share the gospel, as I think we would all probably share that desire. But, you know, I think inside of me, I'd probably created or inherited or taken on certain constructs and perspectives of what I thought evangelism was. And so I'd go out and try it, and it just sort of feel awkward and weird and sort of arbitrary, like sometimes even like a sales pitch. And it almost like I could sense like, almost having to like flip a switch to do this instead of like, why isn't it just happening? And always a desire to do it, but it always felt odd like that. And so, but coming into this residency and working with Al and the rest of the cohort has been, I think it's in some ways it's given me permission to say, hey, go and be a researcher, go get out there and get to know people and go listen to them. And it sort of unlocked some of those things and broadened my perspective of what evangelism is. So where the point now, you know, I'm doing this now and I'm having more fun than I think I've ever had doing evangelism. You know, it's fun, it feels natural, it's interesting, it's exciting. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what it's looked like so far. And I'm just realizing that I have a lot to learn still as I go about this.
Yeah, that's so good. Just the idea of, so I mean, obviously as a pastor, I would love for every person in my church to tell me that sharing their faith is the most natural and it's a fun adventure. And so, man, so let's just dive in, man. Help us understand, like, tell us some stories about how tattoos have opened the door for you in this new journey.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I'll share this first one. This is I mean, I call these the three stories that I want to share are these guys are friends, which is pretty neat. They've become friends through this. I didn't know them until now, but this first one is interesting. He was open from day one, very open, very honest, always willing to just, say what his struggle was. And this was at the height of the quarantine, by the way, which was an interesting time because I thought, okay, Al, you're telling me to go interview people out in public about their tattoos, but everybody's in quarantine. And that was one of the neat things about the cohort is just the idea of like, well, get creative, think of something. And people gave me ideas, and my wife helped me think through that too. She's very thoughtful, but so I started doing them to begin with. We made a Facebook post, and I started doing them on Zoom like this. And so this was one of the first ones I did. And this friend of mine, he's very open. He said, I'm right now missing my AA meetings because of quarantine. I'm a recovering addict, and this is where I'm at right now. And I'm thinking, wow, this is okay. I haven't even got to ask him about his tattoos yet, but there's something about this, setting up this meeting to talk with each other. He felt the opportunity to just be open. And so I said, well, you have some ink. I'd like to hear about that. How does that tie into your story? And he had quite a few, but there's a couple that stick out to me. There was one he has here. It's a rose, and it was for his granddaughter. And he processed that without me having to draw a lot out of it. He had his hand on it. He said, I think this is not just for my granddaughter. I think this is me trying to have some kind of connection with my son, who's an active addict and who's not in my life at all. So that one stuck out to me. And then he had another one further up that has the word fear, and it had a heart around it. And he said, well, what's the opposite of fear? For me, it's love. So that was interesting. And in these interviews, I'm sort of full disclosure at the front. I say, hey, I'm a pastor, and I want to listen. I'm learning how to listen. That's what I'm doing. So, and he was able to say, I'm not a believer. I'm not even from around here. I'm from Boston, but I found myself in Alabama. And, so we got to talking. And he said, the timing on this isn't lost on me, that I'm right now stuck in quarantine. I don't have a lot of people to talk to. Can't go to my AA meetings. And we just ended it with, well, my friend, if you get the feeling of needing to drink or do something, like reach out to me. Like, can we stay in touch? I didn't really know what to say at the end of these. At the beginning, I was like, how do I stay connected? But we did, and we've been able to follow up and talk. And since then, I think he texted me the next morning. He said, hey, just checking in, Pastor Michael. And we got on from there. And there was a day where he texted me and said, hey, pray for me. I'm trying to come off this medication that's driving me crazy. And we went back and forth. And I said, why don't you stop by the house and we'll pray. And we kept going back and forth. And at one point he said, pray that I be saved. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? And we talked a little bit more, and he said, no, I don't want you to, don't try to like save me with your, the Bible stuff or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I don't really know exactly what you mean, but let's pray. and I actually talked to him on the phone again today, interestingly enough. And I tried to unwind some of that with him. I said, how is it that we're able to have these spiritual conversations? I'm a pastor. You've told me you're not a Christian, but you want to be saved. And he said, well, I think it's because the relationship began on this premise of trust, because you listened to me to begin with. You wanted to know me. And And so that was interesting. He said, I do want to hear from you. I want you to talk to me about spiritual things. And so that was one of my early on interviews. And I just felt like I was sort of sitting back, spectator, like watching all this happen.
Man. So just a set of questions that you asked, and all of a sudden his story comes pouring out. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Al, so when you hear someone who's doing a residency under you come back with a story like that, I mean, what does that strike in you?
You know, several things. One is, I heard this guy call him Pastor Michael. And so one of the values that we have in ET is bringing people in your parish. In other words, you're that spiritual person in their life. And by the way, one of the ways that you get permission to be that parish minister is you get told the secrets, right? It seems to be this bridge that if you get told the secrets, you become a significant listener in their life. I also see what Pastor Michael does is unique. So often in evangelism, we're in charge. We're the person that has the information. And that's switched. Pastor Michael switches that. They're in charge. He's the learner. He's the listener. You guys have heard me talk about this before. A tattoo is sort of like this. It has two hands, the tattoo, or if you want to trail it to the image of God. One hand says, don't even think about it. This is my secrets. These are my private art. This is my private story. And you can pick this up oftentimes in the body language of the person that walks by you. But the other hand does this, please come ask me my story. And so there's this tension in the tattoo of permission. And what Michael does in a genius way is he has a wait for it muscle and is able to navigate this and this. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that sounds really good, because I think that I love that tattoos are this place where it's like, no, don't talk to me. No, come. And the hand that you receive is all based on how you come across to a person. You know, if they feel like you're safe, if they trust you, like you said, Michael, with this guy who said we started off on a relationship of trust. And so, yeah, based on our disposition, based on the way that we communicate to them, will determine which of the hands that, which hand we get from them. So that's really good. Michael, let's, lots more questions are coming up, but yeah, let's go on. Like, tell us another story.
Sure. So this next one was as the quarantine began to ease up, I slowly got out and about and got to meet up with people in person. And so this next one was, again, we put a Facebook post out on our community Facebook page here in our city. And I had quite a few people respond, by the way, which was really interesting. I mean, like almost 300 people that wanted to participate in this. But this was
wait. Can you let's slow down for a second? Wait, so give us just a tiny bit of information more. What did you do with Facebook that you got 300 people respond?
Well, yeah, I mean, it still blows my mind. So my wife said, hey, I want to help you get some interviews. And, it was still quarantine at the point, but we were getting to ease back out. She's like, my wife has a tattoo on her wrist here. She said, I'm going to put a post out there on our city, what's happening in Trustful message board. And we'll just see, maybe we'll get 10 or 15 people that want to help us out. And she said, hey, could you help my husband out? He's doing this research project. And I think something about that actually helped when people realized they could help us with something. But 300 people responded, and we were like, what do we do with that? How do we do this? Well, we've been working through that and meeting with people, and it's been really special. But one of those is another new friend of mine as a result of this. And he came, he said, I didn't know what you were doing with this, but I wanted to share my story. And so he sits down, he has two, you'd never know he even has a tattoo. He's got a small one here and a small one here. So he tells me the story about this one here, which is a bumblebee. And it's the fact that he lives his life like a bumblebee, always just sort of banging into something until he gets it right, And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. He's always trying to, he's gonna get it done one way or another. However many times he fails, he's gonna get there. And so he shared that, and then he said, okay, now my entire life is centered around one event. He said, my dad, when I was in high school, when I was growing up, was a youth director at a local church. And he got caught in a relationship with one of the teenagers who happened to be my ex-girlfriend.
Oh.
I'm like, wow, okay. And he goes on to just talk about how that went about and how he confronted him. And when he realized it was true, he just, he left town for a little while as a 16-year-old, just like, what on earth's going on? And he said, I was so angry that he said, I just took a knife. I wasn't trying to hurt myself. He said, I just cut a little gash on my arm so that I could remember this, because I never wanted to forgive him for it. And so I'm just sitting there like, wow, this is heavy. This is tough. And so he went on to share a little bit more about that. And he said that has been, my life has pivoted around that event. And then he said, then a couple of years ago, I had my first granddaughter, and I had a tattoo put over that scar for her. Mm. And so I'm sitting there like, wow, I don't even know what to say. I'm just sort of blown away by the story. And I just said, well, how many people have you shared all of that with? And he said, my wife's the only one that knows. But he let me, and by the way, he let me record that, and it's on the channel.
Really? Okay.
So it's and he was happy with that. He's actually, he's become such a good friend and just fan of what we're doing that he's now helping me out with videos and stuff. We stayed in touch. So kind of to follow on from there, again, I'm sitting there I do these interviews and I'm like, okay, what do I do with this now? This person has trusted me with something pretty intimate. Where do I go with that? And so I just tried to stay in touch. I'd text him and say, hey, how are you? How's it going? And eventually I asked him one day, I was like, do you have any other friends that would be up for an interview? I'm still, wanting to find others that I could interview. And he started connecting with people. And he said, I gave it about a month before I started connecting people because I wanted to make sure there weren't any gimmicks. And he said there weren't. He said, you didn't try to invite me to your church. You didn't send me anything in the mail. You didn't ask me for money, or, people weren't bugging me about that. And so I realized at that point, okay, this is for real. And then he said, I felt like I left a demon behind that day when we met in the bakery. And so we've kept the conversation going, but these types of things I'm amazed, and I'm like, what did I do? I didn't even, how did this happen? There's so much I'm learning from these conversations, but I'm amazed by what people are willing to share.
That's extraordinary. Gosh, I'm just processing. Al, what are you hearing here with this story?
A couple things. I hear a parish being born under his care. And by the way, did you know that the way the staff of the Trustville Presbyterian Church is there's a pastor of the people in the church and an evangelism pastor for the parish outside the church. And that's who Michael is. And so they built their staff around this concept that there is a parish of people that will not likely come in the building, but they are under his care.
Wait, Michael, can you explain that a little bit? What does it actually look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So My senior pastor, I'm the assistant pastor. My senior pastor, he's one of the best leaders that I know. He's been like a friend and a brother that we just get to work side by side in this way in a really cool setup. My church believes and has a heart for evangelism, thinks that it's important. So much so that they said, hey, we're gonna hire a pastor to focus on that and lead us in that. And so it's a really cool setup, and we get to do that together. And it's a lot of fun getting to work alongside of James. He's a brother and a friend and a good leader.
Wow. So, okay. So he's like the lead pastor and your pastor, but your focus is on evangelism and his focus is on the people in the church.
Yeah. His focus is on shepherding,
okay.
teaching, discipleship, and he's incredibly gifted at those things. And I get to do this.
Man, I love it. I mean, Al, this is your dream. It's coming true.
Well, Michael is a natural. And if you've noticed some of the language he used, he said this person became a friend. And then he became a team member. And one of the things we find with our Tattoo Story Hunters ministry is when you listen and hear and hold someone's tattoo story, and by the way, Michael intuitively gets that pathway of listening and hearing and holding. And when the image of God, who has written its art on the skin, by the way, the most intimate things, they begin to follow this leader, and they called him his friend. And then they do one more thing oftentimes. They want to be part of this movement. And that movement, by the way, is a parish.
It feels like someone has this amazing experience with you, Michael, that they feel heard, they feel cared for, they feel known, and they just want someone else they want people to experience the same thing. It's almost like they become little evangelists for what you're doing in some ways.
We find that, Michael, you and I have talked about this, when a researcher making discovery spins off junior researchers. So I want Michael to tell you what he's doing in a local restaurant brewery here in a few weeks. And the team that just said, pick me, I'm in. Tell us about that, Michael.
Yeah. Well, that's actually Thursday night at the local eatery brewery. We're trying to figure out with several others who have been a part of this with me is how do we bring some of these people together? Like, a lot of them are saying, hey, like I'd love to hear some of these other stories. I'd love to meet some of these other people. And so we just kicked around the idea. I can come up with ideas, then I need people in my life that can actually help me understand how to make it happen. And my wife's been one of those for sure with this. She's been great. And so we planned this event, and we're going to have, it's called Tattoo Storytellers Night at the local eatery brewery. We got some music, some live music, and we've lined up 6 people that we've already interviewed to get on a mic and let me interview them in front of whoever else shows up who's got an interest in this, and we'll just see where that goes.
Wow.
Michael.
Wait, hold on, Al, just one sec. If people want, this is going to end up on your YouTube channel, right, Michael?
The hope is we're going to video the evening and maybe take clips of it, or we'll put something on there from that evening. Okay,
so guaranteed, just fly to Trustville, Alabama and show up. But otherwise, it might end up at Tattoo Story Hunters Trustville on YouTube.
Yes, okay. We'll figure that out. I'll have to get some IT people to
help you. Yeah,
take care of all that.
Good. So, Michael, let's give one more at least. While we have a little bit of time before we jump into questions. We do have some great questions that are coming in. Keep those questions coming in on the chat. We're going to get to those here in just a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So this next one is again, I feel like a new friend. through this. He was over at our house with his wife and little son this past weekend. And I got to just process this a little bit more with him on like, hey, what was it like to do this? But so his interview was, and this was one of the early ones too. He's a young guy in his mid-20s, and he began the interview. I said, hey, you know what? I'm a pastor in the area. Learn how to listen, learn how to hear your stories, and I'd love to hear about your ink. And so he says, well, let me start with I've got some that have a theme that are around Vikings. I love Vikings. And so he started talking about all the Viking stories and how they were on him. And then he went on from there. And I think the next one he said was, he said, when I was 18, I got my first tattoo, and it's on my back shoulder, and it's a cross. And he said the girl I was dating at the time, she got it for me for my birthday. And then he said, sadly, I don't consider myself a Christian anymore, though I got that, I guess it had been 7 years before. He said, I've stepped out of all that now, but the tattoo's there. And so he went on a little bit to talk about what he believes. He said, I'm not an atheist. I consider myself more of a deist, but I just sort of I'm very vague in all the spirituality. And I think a lot of some of the Viking stuff probably plays into some of his perspective on spirituality. But he was open to share and talk about it, and that was really cool. And he went on from there. There was one on his arm that was a skull with a clock in its mouth. And I said, tell me about that one. What's that? And he said, well, it comes from some song lyrics that I like. That's, he said, basically, the song lyric is something like, we all stare at broken clocks. But what it meant was, we're all bound, our time is limited by death. And he had another one here that was an open grave, and I'm like, wow, what, okay. And he said, again, it was based on another song lyric, and it was something like, remember death. And so he's thinking deeply about big picture stuff, big picture life questions, like what is death and why are we all bound by that? And he's not afraid to go there, but that was the conversation. He even shared with me in the conversation that he had at one point, as a teenager, felt suicidal, and shared a little bit about that with me also. And so again, it's like one of those, wow, I want to stay in touch. You know, you've shared some pretty heavy stuff with me. How can we stay connected? And anyway, we'd gone back and forth for a while, and I finally got to get he and his wife over for dinner this past weekend. And I just said, what was it like to be interviewed? What was that like to have a pastor interview you? Okay, because you say you're not a Christian, you don't know what you believe. What was that like? And he said it was really it was great. He said, because I didn't know you, I felt like I could just be completely open. And I said, what do I do with that then? Where do I go from there? I told him, I asked the question, like you've shared some intimate things with me, and I felt connected. What do I do with that? And he said, well, you know, because the relationship, the friendship was founded on this concept of you wanting to listen and get to know me, which so few people have done, that it's okay. Like keep following up with me, let's stay in touch, you know? So, and he said, I actually enjoyed being able to talk about what I believe with you. I don't get to do that often. So, and, you know, in all these things, I'm hearing that, and this is why I'm learning, because there's so many things that like coming up inside of me, like, oh, okay, now you need to start talking. You need to start telling him the gospel and all of this. And it's like, well, but that's coming along as we have these conversations. It's coming out in natural ways because he wants to talk about spiritual things. And so, yeah, a lot of this is undoing a lot of just the constructs that I've had inside of me as I think about evangelism.
Yeah, this is extraordinary. It's, man, I love to hear this. Before we dive into some questions, Michael, could you just talk a little bit about what it's like to work with Al and the ET ministry?
For sure. Yeah, it's been so good because Al Al is one who will pursue and seek to understand and get to know and draw out of me and the other residents. Stephen, and you can identify with that as well as a resident. He's has a way of pursuing us and understanding us and drawing out of us in a way that's, few. There's a few other people in my life that can do that. And my wife, my brother, who fellow pastor I get to work with, that does that, and a few others. But Al has a way of drawing that out in terms of helping me see what are the constructs I have, what are my views of evangelism that are either too small or misguided or muted in some way, and just unlocking some of that, but also unlocking things like, how has God wired me? How does God want to use me as an evangelist in this world? And he draws that out in a unique way. And he also, I guess, to say a little bit more about what it's like to be a resident, is I feel like Al's training is, he treats us and models for us as residents how we can pursue and treat and engage with other people, non-Christians and people around us in the world. I think that maybe is one aspect that's so helpful. He's sort of modeling this care for a parish mentality and approach to other people. And and then being a part of the cohort as well, this group of pastors, we're all like learning together. And Al's telling us to do all kinds of weird, crazy stuff, like ask people about their tattoos, and we're all kind of learning together, but we're also sharing what we're learning with each other, and it creates like this laboratory, I guess, of sharing and learning and growing, and we can learn from not just what I'm learning, but 20 other guys that are also learning alongside of us.
Yeah, it's so good. Al, we're going to dive into some Q&A here in just a second, but could you just talk for a minute about what the residency is, and if anybody wanted to get some more information about being a resident?
So, maybe the biggest part is somebody has to want it. They've come to a place, and oftentimes the guy is in his latter 30s to mid 50s, and something's not working anymore. There's a cognitive dissonance going on, that they've been in the building so long. Are they relevant outside anymore? And they'll do almost anything to find that relevance. And some are even leaving the ministry to try to deal with that. One of the things we've discovered is the wild, that space outside the building, loves having a pastor with them if he knows how to be with them. So, Stephen, there's a spectrum, and maybe you can help me with this. On the left-hand side is emotional care. Oftentimes I'll build a relationship with a resident, and he's cooked. He's done. He doesn't know if he's going to get through the next week emotionally or psychologically, and he doesn't know what to do. On the right-hand side are some pretty directed evangelism discovery skills. Like, we work on discovering what's under tattoos. They continue to be this profound gold mine. Francis Schaeffer talked about how art is, one of the compasses of the age that it's written in. And now we live in a space of living art. The soul has decided to write on its wrapper, and it's a profound discovery place. So every resident is between emotional care and coaching them into making discoveries about themselves and others, and they fall on that spectrum somewhere, and it's my job to get in their head and fight for them. Probably my fault and weakness is I'm a little too protective of them. And so, but if you want the nuts and bolts, We do up to 50 evangelism case studies in a year. In the part-time, we do 10 recirculating projects. You're part of a cohort of other brilliant, ridiculously scholar evangelists. Everybody gets to watch everybody else's discoveries, and it's really such a rich environment. It's 2 hours of phone coaching a month. And so you say, Al, what's the bottom line? It's discovery. It's discovery in the wild, because I spent most of my life in what I would call enrichment. And I'm in my final trimester of ministry, and I want to spend it in transformation. And I find ministers using this profound education they have of presenting and taking that into the wild to make discovery. And when they're given permission to use those profound antennas to make discovery in the wild, transformation happens. And their discovery begins to create a new trajectory for their life. Stephen, you've heard me say this, is the more non-Christians a minister knows, the better his mental health.
It's true.
Is that true? Is that true?
No, it's absolutely, there's something about being with people that don't need you to be anything but who you are. They don't have expectations. And it's, yeah, it is wonderful. I guess if anybody is interested in learning more about a residency, you can go to evangelize.today.info. And there's a link there for residents that you can click on if you're interested in getting more information. So, all right, we're turning now to Q&A. We have some comments and some questions here in the chat box. Please keep sending them in if you've got them. Let's see. We got a comment here. Fran Hahn said that, Michael, he loved that the person you interviewed reached out to you the next day before you even reached out to them. And so just it shows the impact that like listening and hearing people makes on folks. As someone, Michael, whose job it is to do evangelism, you know, we've heard from Al talk about this, but what would be your definition of a parish? This is coming from Mark Newton.
Well, it's a good question. I think Al's helped me a lot with that concept, but you know, I actually, my family and I lived for 2 years in England. We worked with a little church plant over there before we were called here to Trustful. And the Anglican denomination there has parishes, and it's like a geographical area where the local vicar is called to that people group. And so in some sense, I kind of see it as these are people that are in my sphere of influence, or my sphere, they're in my world in some way. And it's this group, it's this group of people. So we've got our congregation, those members of our church we've had this mutual submission to one another. We've taken vows to one another in membership, and we belong together in that membership. And then there's this group of people outside of that who are also connected to us in that way. A large majority of them are either not Christians or have rejected church in some way for many different reasons, but they are willing to have me or someone in the church in their life. And Al helped me think about this one day. So in some ways, someone enters your parish when they're willing or want to get back together with you again over some, say I interview them and they want to, they're up for hanging out again. I didn't scare them off. They want to hang out again. It's sort of like they've come into the parish.
It's good. It reminds me of Parable of the Good Samaritan. The question posed to Jesus was, who's my neighbor? And the end of the parable, Jesus says, who was a neighbor to the person on the road? And it sounds like what you're saying is that your parish are the people that you've decided to be a neighbor to. And the folks that are just, in your sphere. So that's good.
But maybe even to say a little bit more to that, because as I'm hearing that, it's like sort of what Al was saying earlier. They've entrusted something to me, and something they've shared, something that's intimate or personal to them. They've told me that thing, and I think in some ways that might be an aspect of them coming into the parish. So yeah.
Yeah. So here's another question from Tim McCown. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, Tim. What's your most challenging encounter look like? And what percentage of your encounters are challenging versus not?
Challenging, let's see. I guess challenging could come in various forms. It could be like maybe hostile, or challenging as in awkward, or challenging. Sometimes the most challenging encounters have been the ones where I've tried to like force something, if that makes sense, where I've tried to force some type of statement or conversation that where it felt like the person could sense that I wasn't fully present. Maybe I was more trying to like think about how I'm going to reply to the statement or what I'm going to say back to them. And sometimes those have been the most challenging, because then it just gets really awkward and the person can pick up on that. But there's been times where I've sat down that I had an interview with a couple. The guy was coming, and then his fiance decided to come too. And then at one point, my next interviewee was coming in before this one was done, and he came, and I was like, okay, what do I tell him while I'm still here and they're on video? And I thought, well, this is going to be really awkward and weird. And what do I tell this guy? Like, he sees me videoing these people, and then it all like totally relaxed when they saw each other and they knew each other.
Oh, they knew each other.
They knew each other. And so like, I guess maybe the way to answer that is a lot of the challenging aspects of this are things that I've like cooked up in my own mind. That sort of like relax away when I'm able to just relax and be present.
Well, I feel that, like when you need the outcome to be a certain way, then you get all angsty, and they can feel and kind of smell that in you a little bit. But if you just say, hey, I'm just going to show up and just try to hear what's going on in this person's life, then I'm sure your sense of relaxation also probably puts them at ease too. Well, here's a question that I want to ask both of you. This is coming from Jackie Vance. How does a PCA woman with a calling to the wild respond and produce fruit for the kingdom in this type of ministry? So, Michael, I'd like you to answer maybe first, and then Al, I want to have your thoughts on this.
I'll just say most of this is happening because of my wife. She made the post. She came up with so many of the ideas. She has interviewed probably just as many folks as I have. We sort of teamed up and said, all right, why don't you interview the women that have said, hey, I'll be interviewed, and we'll do some of those together as we're able. And then I've interviewed a lot of the guys, and she's the thoughtful attention to detail person also. And so this has happened largely due to her being involved as a fellow interviewer. But I think there's a lot of different ways depending on how you're gifted and wired. I mean, there's a lot of the administrative aspect of like, hey, how do you organize 300 people who want to be interviewed? Well, my wife's very organized, and so, but she's also getting out there and interviewing. So I think there's a lot of different ways that one of our sisters in Christ could just jump in and be just as involved as.
So she's interviewed them, like she's interviewed a bunch of people too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably just as many as I have. Great.
Okay. Al, do you have anything else to say on that? Like thinking about if a woman might be a little bit more timid, is everyone who has a tattoo a burly, strap-in guy that would be super intimidating for a woman to approach, or is the reality something different than that?
They're actually the easy ones, by the way, the big burly ones. They're the ones that cry the hardest. So, Stephen, I looked in the mirror one day and I saw that my life was, I was walking on Christian carpet, doing Christian handshakes, drinking Christian coffee, and it was Christians talking to Christians about Christianity. And then I dug deeper and I found that I was involved in a lot of shop talk that benefited the speaker. And how did I get out of that world? How did I get out of these echo chamber questions? And few things break me out of that like a tattoo interview. Mm. And so a lot of people come up with questions about tattoos, and my answer is this, which is odd: go do an interview. Better, go do 10 and see if your question still has validity. So I would say to my friend, this lady that has asked that question is, I think we're giving out aren't we giving out a sheet, Stephen, about how to do a tattoo interview?
We are. For everyone who's registered for this, we're going to send you a one-pager on how to do a tattoo interview.
It's both simple and complex. It has a simple list and a more thoughtful list. But I would say to my friend that asked me that, tattoos are so everywhere. The simple encounter of saying, I remember there was a little gal at the cash register, and I don't like to interview people while they're working. I don't think that's fair, but I just said, I love your ink. Does it have an interview? And she said, these 3 tears are the babies I lost. And I cried all the way to my car, right? I said, what just happened? And so the wild is shouting through body art, and it's just seeing it and saying, I like your art. Does it have a story? And get ready for that adventure in the wild. And go slow. Don't rush. And don't feel like you have to say anything other than thank you. It's your beginning.
So good. Yeah, just on this, we had David Bittler say that his wife went with them, he said, my wife went with us to Sturgis, which is a tattoo convention, back in 2018, and she was probably the best interviewer of the bunch of us. So, men and women, you can engage in this and find lots of success. And like I said, we do have a one-pager that we're going to send out to everybody by email. It's a PDF, and it goes through basics. See someone with a tattoo is step 1. Step 2, say this. Your tattoo looks interesting. Is there a story behind your tattoo? 3, listen. 4, and so it just goes through and makes it super simple. Al has started what he calls Project 1 Million, where we're hoping to get 1 million people to be able to ask one other person in their life, is there a story behind your tattoo, or is there a story underneath your tattoo? It's really as simple as that. Let's see, depending on how much time it takes to answer this question, we got one, maybe time for 2 more. But just the question is, Michael, talk a little bit specifically about when and how does sharing the gospel factor into listening and hearing someone tell their story?
That's a good question, and one that comes up a lot, and probably most often in my own mind as I'm learning how to do this and learning how to listen and wait for it, like Al says, and keep waiting and keep listening. And I'm like, well, when do you get to it? And then I think what I'm realizing is that when I'm not trying to force it, it just happens. They want to talk because I share, because I, at the beginning, say I'm a pastor. They, at some point, want to say something about spirituality. And I don't know if that's sort of culturally where we're at in the South or not, but maybe you guys could speak to that in different regions. But they want to say something along those lines. And so it's that waiting for it that it comes out, and it comes out in this context of trust, to where with some of these folks, I feel like I can and I have been able to say sometimes direct things about the gospel. So and in my mind, though, I want to build that construct of like, where's that point? Where's that line? When do I get there? And I keep having to say, stop trying to do that and listen and wait for it. And I was even processing this just the other day, this week, with my fellow pastor and brother, James, and we were just talking through this, maybe this sort of construct. Sometimes we feel like we've got to go over here to the side and get this gospel presentation and bring it into the conversation, rather than letting Christ, who, if he truly is indwelling us, he's a part of the conversation, and letting him speak. And again, that's a lot more blurry than we'd probably like for it to be, but that's what I'm learning about that question.
Well, so let me ask, because James Lim asked this question: can you share a tattoo story, or how a tattoo story helped you better contextualize the gospel to that same person?
That's a good question. So one of them was, at some point he had a bad experience with the church in his past. And one of those was, not one of them, but just generally it left him with, and he expressed this, why the church seems so legalistic. It's all about like getting yourself cleaned up and put together and all that. And I was able to hear that and try to say, okay, I hear you. And it makes me sad that you've had those hard experiences. Could I offer this is who Jesus is, as opposed to that experience? And it gave me the opportunity to talk about Christ and the person of Christ, and to set it in opposition to a bad church experience in his past.
So good.
I've had multiple interviews that are something like that may come along at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. I think there are so many factors here, and there's a lot of more questions that are even along these lines, that very often, if a tattoo, it sort of depends on the purpose of engagement. Sometimes a tattoo interview is the beginning of a relationship. It's the beginning of an ongoing relationship. So there isn't some need to get the presentation out in that. It's not, you only have one shot at this, right? In a long-term relationship, you're going to have opportunities to share. But then there might be other times where it's just a one-off, where you meet somebody and you're in line or something, and you have an opportunity to ask them about their tattoo. And in a case like that, where you're not going to see them again, you might want to take a little bit more boldness in the moment and speak, if the opportunity presents itself. And so yeah, it depends, in so many ways. And but I really appreciate that example of how legalism in the person's story then helps you to teach them about justification and adoption, and like the acceptance that God has for us as people, and we're okay, not because of what we do, but because of what Jesus has done. So I love that. Man, well, I feel like we could go on for another half hour or so, but we want to honor our time. So we're here at the hour. And so Michael, thank you for not just for sharing with us, but thank you for being who you are. Thank you for being someone who, along with your wife, was willing to take the bold step of putting it out on Facebook that you were looking for people with tattoos to interview. Thanks for showing up and listening to people, hearing them, and coming back and giving God honor and sharing what he's done through you. Really appreciate this.
Well, it's been good to be with you guys and have the conversation and learn together.
Yeah. Al, thank you for your insight, for your wisdom. Thanks for your leadership with Evangelize Today Ministries. I want to remind people, so I put Michael's YouTube channel in the chat box. So you can, if you just search for the link, it's the one link that's in there. You can also go to YouTube and look up Tattoo StoryHunters Trussville, Trussville. Is there an E on the end, Michael?
Yes, there is.
Okay, yeah, so Trussville, Tattoo Story Hunters Trussville on YouTube. You can find his channel there and watch some more of his interviews. And then just a final thank you to Mission to North America for allowing us to use their YouTube channel, or their Zoom platform, not their YouTube channel, but their Zoom platform. And so we're going to have other Scholar Evangelist videos that we'll be publishing those periodically, but our next live event is going to be on Tuesday, September 22nd. And we're going to be interviewing a pastor, Dina Paulson, and we're going to be talking specifically about how you can build a church by building a parish. And so stay connected to us. Go to evangelizetoday.info. Make sure that you're on our mailing list. You'll get information about the events to come. And so thank you all for being with us. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care.